Hello, this is Darren Pulsifer, Chief Solution Architect of Public Sector at Intel, and welcome to Embracing Digital Transformation, where we investigate effective change leveraging people, process, and technology. On today's episode, we're going to talk about securing telework with our special guest, Steve Orrin, Federal CTO of Intel. Welcome, Steve.
Okay. Thank you, Darren. Good to be here.
We have a very important topic today because we've seen a major shift because of COVID-19 into telework.
We've seen organizations move from a small remote force that are doing teleworking to the entire workforce teleworking. And that is really stressing both the networks as well as security and other parts of the organization to meet the demand and meet the need of the current environment.
In a previous podcast, we talked about the teleworker modes and how that's just exploding. And like you said, it's taxing all our networks and all that stuff that's going on. And we covered all the different modes and what we can do to scale that. But we didn't cover your favorite topic.
Security and how it applies to these new environments or the extreme use of existing environments is really an interesting problem. The notion of doing VDI or leveraging SaaS services for remote access is not new. But what is new is the sheer volume of both employees, contractors, partners that are now using these systems to do all of their core work as opposed to a select manageable few. And so whether you're doing something like device as a terminal VDI kind of environments or extending your enterprise network out to enterprise clients at remote locations to even SaaS and PaaS kind of use cases, security is going to be a unique challenge in all of those environments. And organizations need to figure out how best to deploy their existing capabilities and the capabilities they have and they're planning to use to secure and protect their access points, the data, the devices, and their users as they try to service this new world order of remote working and telework in the current environment with COVID-19.
Well, and what we've seen is just, you talk about, the scale. Department of Navy just recently came out with an article that said how they have adjusted. They have over 800,000 workers in the Navy. That's crazy. And their VPN could only handle like 40,000. So they've major shift to this collaboration tools in order to handle just the onslaught of people working from home.
And I think you'll see that theme recur in every kind of organization, that they had planned for a certain small number, or even in a worst case scenario, a medium-sized number of workers remotely working or using their telework capabilities and collaboration capabilities. But no one had ever really anticipated the entire workforce of a given organization being remote all at the same time. And you're seeing this problem play out not just in the networks of the organizations that are supporting their teleworkers, but in the infrastructure, whether it be the telecom providers, the CSPs, and the SaaS providers, being able to support all of these users all at the same time. When we look at it from the different angle of what does this mean to security, you have a lot of the same problems that you've always had with remote enterprise clients and teleworking and VDI. You have the security of the end device and what data you need to protect on it. You have the access points and the access to enterprise services. But in this new environment that we're dealing with COVID-19, the sheer volume of people working and the mad rush to enable teleworking, what you're finding is you've got enterprise clients that are now running in unsecured environments and networks that were maybe never intended to be used outside the corporation, but you were able to take your laptop home for the first time so that you could work from home. We're seeing targeted phishing and malware attacks going after the teleworker, trying to trick them into installing malware. In essence, we have an increased attack surface area, much larger than what we originally, what most organizations had originally planned for. And we have new technologies and new tools being introduced into the environment, like these new collaboration and video conferencing tools that themselves can expose your enterprise and your data to attack and to malicious use. I mean, there have been several articles and reports in the last several weeks of new attacks and vulnerabilities being posted for attacking some of these collaboration and video conferencing tools. And so I think it's a combination of sort of the increased attack surface area, new environments that sometimes these clients or systems have to operate in that they were never planned for. And the realization that our home work environment that we're now all working from is now part of the enterprise. And that's something that the bring your own device and VDI had sort of talked about when they were first looking at it, as like extending my enterprise out to the teleworker, but never at this scale. And so a lot of the risks and trade-offs that they did for the small number of users that they had originally planned for are now being put to the test within the entire workforce. And how do you secure those environments, or at least bring enough risk reduction to be able to manage them appropriately?
Well, and not only just the sheer volume, but how fast it happened as well. This was not like, oh, I'm going to have a planned rollout over the next 18 months. This was in 2 weeks, everyone's working from home. This is unsurmounted in a shift that we've ever seen in IT. Never seen anything happen
Exactly.
this quick. So it exposes a lot of issues, right? As you brought up. So we're going to talk today a little bit about, all right, what can we do with all the different types of clients that are now connecting into our enterprise data center. So let's dive right into like the notorious bring your own device.
So it's a good problem to start with bring your own device, because it really is one of the harder things to deal with, and that is that you've got an unmanaged device, whether it be a laptop or a phone or a tablet, accessing whether it be your enterprise data center services and capabilities through a direct connection or VPN, or cloud services and SaaS services that you're providing to your end users. And the key challenge is that unlike an enterprise client where you have all of these security agents running and managed by IT, you now have a device that's owned and managed by the user, and maybe they've given you access to load a couple of agents on there. Maybe you have the ability to do some enforcement of policy, but it's really an unmanaged device at the end of the day. And it's something that the user uses for their personal things. So there's only so much you can do to that device without impeding the user's need to use it as a personal device. So we look at some of the approaches that have been successful for how to secure a teleworker using a BYOD. A lot of this isn't rocket science. It's the classic, make sure that you're pushing the latest patches to the system as a requirement, enforcing good access control to your enterprise and to your services, implementing multi-factor authentication, and then surrounding your assets with the right protections. And that's using enterprise rights management for access control of the data, enforcing, and this is a term that I know that people haven't used in a long time, but endpoint access control, to make sure that you know the client that's coming in, you know the user that's using that client coming in, even if you can't trust the network or the environment they're living in, and enforcing policy on what clients can get in. And so one great example is having that EAC endpoint push out and make sure that full disk encryption is turned on, that it is patched to the latest level, that the virus scan files, DAT files, have been updated prior to giving it access to your enterprise services and VDI infrastructure. That way you can create a barrier and make sure that those rich clients are at least up to a certain level of security prior to giving them access, and that they've implemented the right policy controls on the local client to be able to deal with the ERM and other kinds of tools you're using on the back end. And so I
Now,
think it's a collaboration, and I think that one thing we can do is leverage the work that was done years ago when organizations first evaluated BYOD, but now turn all those capabilities on them to full bear.
now another option might be not to actually allow them to connect to the enterprise data center at all, and maybe
If you
just
have the
use
ability to do
cloud
that, yeah.
services, right? If you have SaaS already out there, that could be another option, right? Oh, you just need multi-factor authentication, and now you can access some websites, and that might
And I
be
think
another option.
absolutely. I think what's interesting about that is if IT and the CIO organizations within these companies are looking at ways where they can help reduce their risk, oftentimes it may be spending a little extra time and energy moving some of those enterprise services out through a cloud or SaaS provider, and that will help eliminate the risk of direct access, especially from BYOD, so that you leverage all the infrastructure the cloud service providers and the SaaS providers provide for security, for gateways, for firewalling, and use the multi-factor authentication. And that way it helps reduce the risk to the overall data center, providing that quote unquote proxy of the SaaS environment. And many organizations may have been fairly far down the road of adopting SaaS and adopting PaaS infrastructures to enable this. And this is the opportunity to kickstart those and get them out there, deploy them, go from pilot to production, because it ultimately will help reduce the risk to the enterprise data center.
Great. Now, the ideal case would, though, not do a bring your own device. The ideal case would be like an enterprise rich client, right? Something that you have the software put on, that it is an extension of your network.
Exactly. And I think that is where we see it's both the best scenario, but also sometimes the highest risk.
Why is that?
In an environment where you've already planned to allow users to take their laptops home before the COVID-19 crisis, and have secured that laptop with full disk encryption, with secure boot, with data protections and local firewalling, and enforcing good patching on that system, that it's really become a managed extension of the enterprise, then it's really about just being able to handle the load of, instead of a small number of remote employees, to all your employees leveraging that infrastructure. But what you often find is that in many organizations, they had the salespeople or remote field engineers had that capability, but core engineering and finance and HR and so forth were work from office employees. And so their clients may not have had the same level of agents and security due diligence and controls put in place. And as you mentioned earlier, there was that mad 2-week dash to get everyone enabled at home. And so now it's how do we make sure that those enterprise clients that a lot of times were never meant to leave the enterprise, never leave the building, now being able to operate in unsecured environments and networks. And so some of it is turning on and pushing those capabilities to those clients and making sure that they are now the same as the remote workers that were already enabled, and flipping on a couple extra controls on the enterprise data center, doing endpoint policy enforcement and EAC when you can, enterprise access control, enforcing multi-factor authentication as a requirement now to be able to protect your data center from a client that's operating in insecure environments. One of the things that people often forget is that it's not just about protecting that laptop or that tablet or that component, that device, but it's connecting over a network in the home that's sharing resources with your children's laptops, with your TV, with your internet-enabled microwave, with all those devices that are exposed to the internet and oftentimes aren't secured. And so there are a variety of attack points and footholds that attackers and malware can get into the local network that the enterprise risk clients may not be protected from because it's never really operated in that kind of environment. And so I think one way to look at this is for those rich client teleworkers that are using getting direct access to the enterprise data center, it's getting all of the right security agents and controls implemented on the client, enforcing good policy on what access control can have. And I think this is a case where in turning on the right policies on the ERM, on the enterprise rights management, to be able to say these kind of users with these kind of systems in these kind of cases get this level of access, and changing access control rights based on the kind of user. There have been, like I said, most organizations have done some very successful pilots on this, and now it's time to roll it out enterprise-wide. We don't have the opportunity to wait.
Now, this brings up an interesting thing that we've heard from one of our customers in healthcare. New employees are not just given a laptop, they're also given a managed router to go into their home.
That's a really interesting idea.
Right? So,
and if organizations can support that, that is a really good idea.
Yeah, I mean, the cost is minimal, about $100, and now they can manage the network that this device is on as well. So interesting. Some people are trying some new things out on this. Now let's talk about the infamous VDI environments and also any SaaS environments, because they're somewhat similar in that I'm now accessing services either in the cloud services or in my enterprise data center, but they're limited on how much I can access.
And so in this case, it's a lot of the security 101 for enterprise IT. So implementing data protections, virtualization security for both the enterprise data center and what they can do on their access points and the brokers, application security practices, protecting your apps, protecting the web development, doing scans, doing good secure development, implementing secure boot. These are, this is part and parcel with deploying cloud and enterprise services. But the challenge now we have to face is that these are now actively being used. They're no longer in pilot. They're no longer just a small number of manageable users. It's the entire organization. And so IT needs to do the due diligence to make sure that all of their enterprise apps and from the VDI and the private cloud that they're deploying to their end users directly or via SaaS have the right security controls, have the patching up to date, have implemented secure boot and secure isolation technologies, that they're have updated and managed their firewall for the enterprise clients and the TLS sessions and other security measures for the secure connections to the cloud services, that they've turned them on. Oftentimes what we find is that organizations have done a great job of deploying the key apps and making sure they're secure, and then there's a couple that made it through the cracks, or there was a third-party app that was put in as a support application that exposes their information or wasn't using TLS. It was defaulting to something else, and therefore they're left exposed. And so this is the opportunity here, is to do an accurate surveying of the enterprise and cloud services that you're deploying to your workers, and making sure that they're all secured equally and that they're all given the credence, because it's not just about the mission critical apps. It's now about all of the key apps that you're enabling your enterprise clients and SaaS users are each individually could be an attack point and could be used and leveraged to get into the data center and into the cloud.
Now, a cousin to VDI and cloud services. Basically, in this mode, your client is kind of like a dumb terminal or a terminal, right? I'm just accessing a screen, basically. But something similar but somewhat different is SaaS clients, right? Or as a service clients. A great example of this is Office 365, where I'm using services in the cloud, but I'm also using things on applications on my rich client. Like if I edit something, I can edit disconnected, but I can also easily share it. It's saved and backed up and encrypted in the cloud. So this is a little bit different. There's other things that we have to worry about.
Absolutely. And I think, again, some things, it's about having the appropriate data protection and enterprise rights management for the access of the data through the cloud services back to the data center. And it's also about protecting both points. So the client access of the class of these cloud services using multi-factor authentication, using TLS, but also making sure that the cloud service access to the enterprise data center's private cloud and enterprise resources is also protected at the network and data access and application layers. You want to be able to protect both sides of this. And this is where understanding how these clients are using those services and what data they're accessing is where the ERM comes to play. So the data that's being generated and managed out in the cloud is really being, then interplaying with enterprise services inside the data center. And so whether it be pulling specs or pulling the latest data that an end user needs through the cloud, or fully interacting in the cloud, but then having decisions being made based on those cloud data, generated data, you need to be able to protect both ends. And so this is a case where deploying ERM, not just for what our enterprise does, but actually deploying ERM through the cloud service providers and implementing those controls all the way through to the client.
Great. Now, we've talked about lots of different modes that workers work. Now, let's talk about the malicious worker, or just, I don't want to call them a dumb worker, but someone not educated in security like myself. I'm not a great security guy. You help me secure my home network, which we'll talk about later, just from some advice. So let's talk about those users. Let's talk about misuse and abuse of insiders. People have already authenticated. So what can we do to help protect against that?
It's a very good question and a challenge. There always are challenges around insiders, both, as you mentioned, misuse, so deliberate misuse of IT resources or compromise of data, and abuse, or sometimes just, dumb errors. You've clicked the wrong link, you copied the file into the wrong place, you made the wrong decision, you weren't thinking at the time. And this is where enterprise IT needs to do a variety of different things to help manage the threat and risk from misuse and abuse of the insider. And this goes beyond just good authentication and good security policy. It's about policy-based access control and policy enforcement. What that really means at its core is making sure that you're preventing the misuse of information, because if a user doesn't have the right access, they should not get it. So it's about least privilege and making sure that they have the right to do, the right to know, based on their role or based on the group that they belong to, and applying those policies at the role and group level and enforcing it all the way down to the data level. So not just on the application access, but actually down to the data, doing it both in the enterprise and with your cloud services. But then with the major arsenal that an IT brings to bear is monitoring, audit, and threat intelligence. And that's really what you need to do to be able to address the problem of abuse and insider threat. Because if I'm a legitimate user accessing data that I legitimately have access to, no amount of security controls can prevent me from accessing that data. And even if you put in controls on the client to try to prevent me from copying it, there are multiple ways that users can subvert that to get the data out of the system if they really want to, even as simple as taking pictures of screens. So that's where monitoring, audit, and threat intelligence goes into play. And IT deploying that across the enterprise data center and their cloud environments to monitor the activity, monitor the time that people are spending in certain applications, managing that across a long lifespan. So the good news is that IT has been monitoring users. They know what I do, they know what you do in your day job. And now that you're doing it from home, you're still going to be doing a lot of the same activities. So monitoring those activities, but at all the entry points, and then feeding that into a threat intelligence system that can scale to the organization is really a way that they're going to be able to pick up on aberrant activity, aberrant behavior, or not exactly the smartest behavior, and be able to catch those early before something goes awry.
So Steve, thank you very much for today. This was very informative. Some great ideas here, some great things that we can work on. What would be some last words that you have for all of those IT professionals that now have everyone working remote?
So I think that the three things that I would take away is, number one is we've got to think differently now, which means deploy the technologies that you may have been piloting, get them out there, educate your users, turn on two-factor authentication, and protect the data at scale. And that is really, if we can do those three things, we can actually help reduce the risk of this new entire enterprise teleworker environment and be better prepared for the next round of this or for the next pandemic if we've implemented these key things to help our users understand what it means to telework securely, enforcing good authentication and access practices on the user, and make sure to protect the data no matter where it lives, because it's going to live outside your organization now.
Thanks for listening to Embracing Digital Transformation today. If you liked our episode, go ahead and give us 5 stars on your favorite podcast or video streaming site. You can also find out more on embracingdigital.com. Until next time, keep moving forward and embrace the digital revolution.